When my tears turn to laughter, that child long ago, my soul starts to linger. It's home I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me along to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Wherever I go.
At the end of the 1800s, this area around Lake Temiskaming was the horizon for a whole lot of dreamers and schemers. This was the new Ontario. Haileybury was to be the Queen City of the North. Nuliskert over here was to be the center for the farmers of the Little Clay Belt. And by chance, out of the hard rock of the Canadian Shield came silver sidewalks and glory holes and mother lodes and the town of Cobalt. This place is special for me. I was born on a farm just a few miles north of Liskert. Went to school out there. Went to high school in New Liskert. I was very pleased to see the old Empire Theatre still standing down there on Armstrong Street. It must be an historic site by now. We used to go to Saturday matinees there for, I think, 10 cents. Of course, one of the big excitements was getting a gang of kids together and walking up Whitewood Avenue to the TNNO railway station to watch the train come in. Just the one a day. Yes, this whole program is going to be a real nostalgia trip for me as we tell the story of what's become known in Northern Ontario as the Tri-Town. Snaking its way through the Little Clay Belt of the district of Temiskaming, the Ontario Northlander heads down the height of land that bridges the tidewater of James Bay. The Rift Valley, framed by Precambrian rock, is part of an ancient glacial lakebed, rich in sedimentary deposits. Between farmland and Lake Temiskaming, straddling the Wabi River, the town of Nuliskert. South of it, hugging the shoreline, Haileybury. As the land is to Nuliskert, the lake to Haileybury, the rock is to Cobalt. About 20 kilometers southwest, the third sister in the Tri-Town Cinderella story wears the colors of yesterday. Like beads on a rosary, the towns are linked by the rail line and a host of characters that live again through the hands of Ernie Fauvel.
I think we all have a certain nostalgia for the old days. There was a lot of hope involved in these people coming up here. They all wanted to hit that pot at the end of the rainbow. A lot didn't.
Land, lake, rock, and legacy. Learning from generations before.
Okay, we're on the Kerr Lake Arch. Now that particular opening over there represents what's left of the silver sidewalk.
Silver. All over, head frames stand. Haunting monuments that speak of dreams made, dreams forgotten. Dreams inspired by a provincial geologist's report. John Hunt.
The silver literally protruded through. In fact, Willett Green Miller said that there was silver lying on the surface like cannonballs. Quite incredible. There's pictures showing silver bricks stacked up like cordwood at the Cobalt station.
Cobalt, the host ore that gave legs to the north and a name to a town. As the station is to this place, the courthouse is to Haileybury. The building, a waypost to the community's place as county seat, the town's name from the British alma mater of its pioneering father, Bruce Taylor.
I think the thing that really shaped Haileybury was the fact that silver was discovered in Cobalt in 1903. because good land in Cobalt was just unavailable for building houses and at a town site, many of the people who worked in Cobalt actually lived in Haileybury. And this is where really the impetus came for the building of Haileybury.
New Liskeard, the country cousin in today's family of places, a family that knew rivalry in its youth, now cohesive in maturity. A history recorded from the 1600s. The publishing trend lives on. Peter Fancy.
The wealth that was coming out of Cobalt gave Haileybury stability. It gave New Liskeard stability. But New Liskeard also, what has kept New Liskeard strong and what a man called Elijah Stevenson, who owned the New Liskeard Speaker, said it that day, when the silver is long gone, the farmlands of the clay belt will still be here. And that prophecy proved to be true.
A 56-kilometer strip of land stretching to the northwest, an agricultural phenomenon that turned eyes north. Today, a living inheritance, interpreted at the New Liskeard College of Agricultural Technology.
We've tried a few different numbers. We've gone as high as 150 and we've gone as low as 40 to figure out what the right planting density is to give you the maximum yield.
I want you to take turns running your hand over the animal. So we'll go from the lips and the nostrils, the face. There are ribs coming down from the back. Each rib is attached to one of the vertebrae or backbones.
A service center to the surrounding farming community in Diamond Township, for example, New Liskeard, dating to 1892, has evolved from its foundation that began around a sawmill on the Wabi River. Wood and metal-based industries carry on here. One of the oldest continuous operations in the region, this foundry, as the Wabi Iron Works, was once tied to the building of steamboats, and later thriving, supplying the needs of cobalt silver mines. Legacy, the Haileybury School of Mines, built on cobalt know-how.
Let's try calibrating this atomic absorption spectrophotometer for strontium.
Out of Cobalt grew Elk Lake, the silver finds of Elk Lake, James Township, Galganda. Out of Cobalt came the money to start the Porcupine mines with the Timmins brothers, who had the LaRose mine in Cobalt. Cobalt was a crucible, a hard rock crucible for training miners and developers who spread throughout northern Ontario. And Cobalt, truly, to a great extent, was the beginning of northern prosperity.
I can thank my dad, my father, for this. We were very young, and Dad would tell these stories about his early days, about grandfather and about his father before him. And I could visualize them. I see the stories. Sometimes I pull a sculpture out of my head, and I just can't imagine where it came from. And then as I'm working on it, all of a sudden I have a memory of what my father told me about certain incidents in the bush camps and in the mines. I love doing them, mining and the bush. I guess there's something in our past that comes out for me.
Temiskaming, the Algonquin word meaning at the place of the deep water, became the meeting ground between native peoples and fur traders beginning in the 1670s. As traffic expanded, so did communications, the first commercial steamer appearing in 1882.
1882, I think, is recognized as the first official settlement. And it was the Catholic Church that first recognized the potential of the agricultural area up here, and they set up an organization that was called the Lake Temiskaming Colonization Society, and they encouraged settlers, or colonists as they called them, from southern Quebec and from France to come into the area and settle here.
Rather than letting the commercial interests of Montreal take over this northern region, the businessmen of Toronto were saying we should be doing a parallel penetration on the Ontario side of Lake Temiskaming. And that started to happen. Now, it didn't really start to happen until there were certain men who left the Hudson's Bay Company. They had worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, in particular a man called Charles Cobalt fire.
He first came up into the Lake Temiskaming area as an axeman on a survey that was done to delineate the boundary between Quebec and Ontario, and that was 1874. And he pretty much fell in love with the area. He was quite active in promoting the area. He wrote a pamphlet that he distributed quite widely in southern Ontario and also in England and in his home area in England, encouraging people to come up to take advantage of the cheap land and then the good agricultural possibilities up here.
Despite his efforts to put down the southern view that, in Farr's words, the North was too cold for successful agriculture, only fit for bears and dreamers like myself, it would take a worldwide depression to set off the immigration needed to settle the region. When that began, Farr's dreams were still beyond his fingertips.
It didn't take people long to realize that the best land was not at Haileybury. It was north of New Liskeard, where really the clay belt starts. And he was a little disappointed because he saw Haileybury as the center of population, and it didn't turn out exactly that way. By the turn of the century, most people were bypassing Haileybury and coming into New Liskeard, and then working their way up into lots.
Saturday morning in New Liskeard. I remember market days when we came in from the farm to take in the sights and the sounds and sell whatever we could. So there is more than the railway and the Empire Theatre to keep tradition alive here.
If they get fast, you're gonna circle. Smaller. Now pull with your outside rein at the same time. Pull with your outside rein at the same time. Circle harder, harder, harder. Harder, Linda. Circle that a girl. More. Circle more. Harder. Pull her around. Pull her around a little more. Ho there. Ho. 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 Good.
Now that you know all about the parts of the horse, you get a chance to learn something about the parts of a sheep. This is an intact ram of the Dorset breed. His name is Ralph. All of you have a diagram of the various parts of the sheep, which I hope you've studied a bit so far. And I'm going to go quickly over them, running my hand over the animal, and then I want you to come one at a time and run your hand over the animal and name the parts as you go. Come and try your luck. Show your skill.
Okay. The neck, top of shoulder, right, and the shoulder,
Right?
the forearm, and the leg right here. It's not
Good.
thigh, it's leg, right?
Thigh or leg will do.
Here, fetlock and decloth and hoof.
Good. Very well done.
The Tri-Town story holds many chapters, adventuresome stories of human interaction and the quest to succeed.
C.C. Farr started up a newspaper called the Haileyburyan, and there was a continual rivalry in the press, you know, and editorial comments between the three newspapers. There was always a little bit of bitterness, I think, on C.C. Farr's part because Haileybury didn't develop into the major center that he thought it would. And he was always taking shots at New Liskeard. And when you read some of the early editions of the papers going back to 1904, 5, and 6, you know, you pick up this little thread throughout the editorials. There's always, just about every issue, there's always some little comment about what C.C. Farr is saying in his newspaper this week, and apparently it got quite bitter at times.
Over the years, there was this rivalry between the two towns of Liskeard and Haileybury. Liskeard saw Haileybury build the first hotel, the Matabanic Hotel. The word Matabanic meant where the trail came out. Liskeard had its own hotel. A man, Khalil Farah, bought land on the Wabi River and built the Canada House Hotel in 1900. Haileybury had the first sawmill. By 1900, New Liskeard had its own sawmill, so back and forth the two communities jockeyed for position. C.C. Farr stood up for Hillsbury, stood up for his vision. His original vision of having a farming community never did materialize. Cobalt interfered with New Ontario, if you want, but that interference meant the making of New Ontario.
The land fit for bears and dreamers was destined for change, with one single event that needed little promotion to put the place on the map overnight. (1902). The push was on by the Ontario government to put through the Temiskaming and Northern Ontario Railway. The move meant the province would have access to a saltwater harbor on James Bay. But more important, as a colonization line, it would counterbalance Montreal-motivated railway building, which was already encouraging settlement on the Quebec shore of Temiskaming. By the summer of 1903, the rail gangs were close to mile 104. As the rail line pushed further north, two characters, timber cruisers they were called. They were fellows who scuttered around the countryside looking for wood that could be made into railway ties. They lucked into a find right along here somewhere on the shores of this little lake that would actually change the course of history. They were quick to take advantage of their find, of course, but it wasn't very long before the news leaked out and the rail line became a floodgate for opportunists who were determined to have a piece of this dream. The discovery of silver by J.H. McKinley and Ernest Darrah set off the unplanned birth of a town at Long Lake, the $1 Million Lake. Millionaires. On April 9th, 1909, the Cobalt paper, the Daily Nugget, printed a list of 35 of them, a third from the region, whose fortunes had been made in the silver mines.
Within a year, the place was just booming. You have to understand, it was a most extraordinary freak. The silver literally protruded through, right through to surface.
This particular deposit is the first mineral deposit found in North America north of Mexico.
By 1910, there were 100 mining properties in various stages of development.
Mile 104 today, historically hemmed in by lake and rock, and laws that prohibited the sale of liquor within 5 miles of a mining camp. The wealth in this poor man's camp lay in the rock and the stuff of fiction.
Cobalt was the center of activity. Cobalt was the town of stores. Cobalt was the town of theaters. Cobalt was a town of untold, untalked about pleasures. Cobalt was an insatiable town of miners, of mine owners, with money spilling out of their pockets. The other two towns regarded it with reverence.
My best estimate, and I've done a lot of research, is that at one time there were about 10,000 people living in Cobalt and nearby township.
But these people were from all over the world. Some of them were kicked out of their country. Some came because there was no opportunity. They came up to Cobalt, and there was Yugoslavs, there was Polish, Italian, a lot of Italian families in Cobalt, French. But this was a land where everybody could make a buck if he worked hard at it.
Here to make a buck. Of the characters that came to try their luck, many reflected their background and personality through their get-up.
But there's a certain flair to the clothes, the old wool pants, the old wool jackets, underwear. I always remember my father. He worked summer and winter, used to wear Stanfield red labels. But they're a heavy underwear, and he wore those in the hottest days of summer. And he said it kept him cool. So if you look at my sculpture, you'll see that I always have a little underwear showing at the top.
Of the rags to riches stories that blanket Cobalt and surrounding Coleman Township, the one often told is of Fred LaRose, here immortalized in clay.
Fred was my grandmother's cousin. He came up to Cobalt, and as the legend goes, he threw a hammer at a jackrabbit or at a fox, split open a rock that was silver bearing. Some people say it's just legend, but I assume it's true. I think it is because there was a mine named after him, the LaRose mine. He did go back home with a fair amount of cash, which is in those days 60, I think it was 60,000, which is a fair amount of cash for a poor old blacksmith in those days.
The money was a byproduct of the characters who were here, and the character, the strength of character that was here, the perseverance, the people who were willing to risk and the people who were willing. And that wasn't just the discoverers of the mineral deposits. That was the people who stayed to develop, the people who lived to mine those deposits, and the people who live here today. That's all part of their heritage.
The heritage of the region today. The restoration of this turn-of-the-century Toronto streetcar is a symbolic reminder of one of the 10 worst disasters in Canadian history: fire. Fire that would ironically weld a bond between the three communities, first in 1906, then 1911. But the fall of 1922 will forever be remembered. On October 4th, hell visited town.
The fire at Hilleberry was held back until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon along the railway line, and then it risen to such intensity that it blew the fire into Hilleberry. By 6 o'clock, the heart of Hilleberry was in total flames. It swept away, literally swept away, all the houses in the south end of Hilleberry, including all the public buildings, the courthouse, the schools. People, all they could do, the remaining people, was to hide along the lake shore, in the lake, with blankets over their head, trying to ward off the cinders, the fireballs, the literal fireballs that were blowing through the air, and the smoke had reduced the visibility to a matter of 2 or 3 feet. So that Temiskaming fire destroyed scores of people and property worth millions. But very quickly, the people of the South, the people of Canada, came to their aid and sent supplies from Toronto, trainloads of supply. There were streetcars sent from Toronto that served some people as houses during the winter. But the comfort of neighboring towns, Cobalt was a comfort to Hilleberry and surrounding communities. New Liskeard was a strong comfort, and there was that tri-town spirit. And tri-town in the sense that there are 3 parts to it, but it's one town, because over the years this has developed, this area has developed into that sense of one community.
Tri-town, one community, an amalgamation of histories, stories, influences, a mix of themes, land, rock, and lake. This place of bears and dreamers like C.C. Farr was the grubstake. Often when I think of the place, I remember the stories, the landmarks, but more often when I think of the place, I just smile and I think of the people. This is my hometown.
Throughout